Greetings and welcome to episode 05 of the Lethal Space Program. In this video, we will once again be attempting to send our first Kerbal to the moon. Will we be successful, or will we meet with tragedy like in the last episode? Let's find out. After briefly checking our funding tasks, let's get right to it and go to the launchpad with the SightSeer Mk2. Of course, Jebidiah Kerman is our pilot for this mission, as he was promised to keep him on with the Lethal Space Program when Gene Kerman took over. As you may be able to see here, there's not enough lighting on this ship to fully illuminate the entire craft. So the first thing we should do here is time warp until dawn, so we can shed a little Kerbal light on the situation. As mentioned in previous videos, watching dark ships fly around isn't as entertaining as it should be. There we go, the horizon is now lightening up, which means the star of Kerbal is spinning into view. Before we launch, however, we have a part testing task to accomplish, which is why we're going to drop this decoupler on the launch pad. And then, away we go. The menu you see popping up here is the F3 menu. It shows you statistics for the flight in progress, and I was looking for any damage upon liftoff here. Solid rocket boosters are just about out of fuel, and now you get to see why the F3 window is very helpful. Without visually checking the ship over, we can actually see from the menu here that there's been no damage to the rocket that's continuing on. Only the solid rocket boosters took any damage here. So we can continue the flight, power the engines back on, and we'll give it a visual once-over anyhow, just to be certain that everything's okay. Here you may be questioning why I keep pulling back from the full throttle, and this is because of the mod Ferram Aerospace that we're using here. And there's two reasons for why I'm not going full speed. The first being that we're trying to avoid the wind wall effect, which is when we're pushing on the atmosphere, it pushes back on us. And so it's more efficient to go a little slower sometimes, depending on what rocket you're using. And the second being that with Ferram Aerospace, it also simulates parts being ripped off of your ship if you're pushing against the atmosphere too hard. So in order to avoid A, wasting a bunch of fuel, and B, having parts rip off our ship and smash other parts on their way down, we keep back on the throttle a little bit. That's the answer to that. As we wait for Jebidiah to achieve orbit here, I thought I'd share two items of space news today. Our first item is that we may have recently discovered the first evidence of water-based clouds outside of our solar system. At 7.2 light-years away, there's a brown dwarf star known as W0855, which may have water-based clouds. Now, if you don't know, a brown dwarf star is what's known as a failed star. It's somewhere in between the size of a gas giant planet and a star. And so it doesn't have nuclear fusion going on at its core, like a full-fledged star does, or a main sequence star. So as a result, these brown dwarf stars are rather cold, and it turns out that this one seems to have a chemical signature that signals that there may be water-based clouds in its atmosphere. So that's pretty exciting. Water may be much more common in the universe than previously thought. Our second item on the list here is that the Rosetta probe, which recently, a month or so ago, achieved orbit after a 10-year journey around a comet, and it has for the last month or so been scanning the surface, making maps, looking for landing sites for a lander that it's carrying, which should be set to land on November 11th. So this is pretty exciting. As some of you may know, that a while back NASA's Deep Impact spacecraft crashed into a comet back in 2005. This will be the first attempt that anyone's ever done to do a soft landing on something the size of a comet and traveling at the kind of angles and speeds that comets do. So that should be pretty exciting. I wonder what we'll find on the surface there. Anyhow, that's it for space news this time. Let's get back to the mission. Our liquid rocket boosters are running out of fuel now, so it's about time we throw away the last of that and shed them. Away they go. We'll pull gently away from them so they don't damage the ship. And as we do so, we cross the border between the atmosphere and space. We are now above the atmosphere. As such, we can do a little bit of science. And in so doing, we complete another mission task for funding. Alright. So we've got that out of the way. We can begin our final maneuvers to insert ourselves in Kerbal orbit. Despite a shaky start, everything looks go. Once you have a little practice, getting into orbit's fairly easy. This is why I'm not using a maneuver node here. So I'm just manually cruising into the proper alignment. Those yellow indicators there, the ascending and descending node, show you how much of an angle difference there is between your orbit and the orbit of your target, in this case the moon. So I'm trying to get that as close to 0 as possible. Although 0.1 or 0.2 is close enough to still hit the moon and not have any issues. While we are cruising along here, it doesn't hurt to set up our antennas to point at Kerbal and the moon. That way we can remain in contact with the Space Center at all times. In game terms, that means we can send back some of our science via radio, and in story terms, it means that the Space Center can know if anything horrible goes wrong. At this point, it would actually be possible to burn straight for the moon and get there pretty soon. There's a couple of reasons I'm not doing this, however. The first being that it's pretty wasteful on fuel. It's very inefficient. Getting a nice stable orbit first, and then burning on a curved trajectory out there, you don't fight the gravity of Kerbin so much. Whereas if I were to burn right now, it would be a much straighter trajectory directly away from the planet Kerbin, and I'd be fighting against gravity straight back the whole way. So for efficiency reasons, this is the way I'm going. Another reason would be that it's a lot safer to get an orbit first. That way, if I mess up the burn towards the moon, I don't fall straight back into Kerbin's atmosphere. And lastly would be that Jebidiah has plenty of supplies on board. There's enough air, water, and snacks for him to last about 30 days out in space. So he's in no rush. So we'll take the nice, easy way. That way, there's less danger to our crew. Also, yes, I am using a maneuver node now. When going around a full quarter turn around the planet, it's nice to know where the direction you're going to have to thrust when you get there is going to be. I'm lazy. What can I say? That is a nice, stable orbit achieved. Now we can begin preparations to bark at the moon. So we begin by setting up a maneuver node to show us how much fuel we're going to burn getting out there, and to try and find the most efficient path out there. As I said, time is not a terribly important factor here, so what we want is the most efficient route possible rather than the fastest. Looks like we have a solution to the transfer problem. So we need to look for the maneuver node location on the nav ball there. And then we're going to time warp around to the other side of the planet and get ready for that burn. Looks like the communication satellites around Kerbal are starting to drift out of alignment. I'll have to take a moment off camera to fix that up after this mission, of course. We've arrived near our maneuver node. It's time to start barking. First thing we got to do is test the engines a little bit, make sure we're getting the right information from our maneuver node estimations. And it looks like they're pretty spot on. So after a moment of waiting here to get into just the right position, we'll be burning full power and getting on out there to the moon. Despite my best efforts and intentions, I'm about to leave a piece of debris floating around Kerbal. A rather large, massive piece of debris. Oh well, every program has its failures. This one's no different. Clearly. Although we do now have a 2.5 kilometer bullet that weighs multiple tons whipping around the planet Kerbal, and that can be pretty dangerous. So we're going to have to keep an eye out for that anytime we launch any other ships. Maybe in a future episode we'll send up some other vessel to grab a hold of it and drag it back into the atmosphere so it's not a danger. Until then though, it will be. I probably could have used the same trick that I did in a previous video with one of the satellites heading towards the moon here, by transferring fuel into the lifter stage to drag it along and slam it into the moon so that I wouldn't leave any debris. However, in this case, there was a concern where that lifter stage was rather large and the engine on the end of it was not as efficient as the one I'm using now. So there may not have been enough fuel to get out to the moon and back with that in tow. So that's why that's not being done here. Considering the track record of this space program's attempts at the moon, it seemed a prudent choice. Alright, we are now on course for the moon. Jebidiah is go. Although, about 3 hours before he gets to the moon, another important event is going to be happening, if you recall. That is, the scan satellite, Explorer of Mins, will be arriving at the moon of Minmus. Although you as a viewer don't need to worry about that. I'll deal with the arrival of that satellite in episode 05.1 so that you get Jebidiah's adventure to the moon uninterrupted. Woof. Next time on Lethal Space Program, Bark at the Moon Part 2. Bark at the Dark Side. Thanks for watching, and as always, I've been your host, AED Games. Please remember to rate, comment, and subscribe, as every click helps.